Undercover boss orders breakfast inside a busy diner, freezes when cook admits he hasn't been paid in weeks.
I don't even know if I'll get paid this week, the words floated out like smoke from somewhere behind the slightly ajar stainless steel kitchen door.
But to Michael Foster, they hit like a cold wind slicing through the warmth of the morning. He sat silently in a deep brown leather booth, one hand still holding half a slice of cold toast, his brow slightly furrowed. The over-easy eggs in front of him suddenly lost all flavor. The coffee steamed lightly, but his mind was now elsewhere. An American-style breakfast diner, Sunrise Diner Branch number 17, was buzzing as usual that morning. People coming and going. The smell of seared butter-fried sausages and warm pancakes filled the space. Michael wasn't sitting in the main area. He'd picked a table tucked near the kitchen, just like he always did during field visits. Today he wore a khaki jacket, plain white shirt, without a tie and round glasses. No one recognized him. And that's exactly how he wanted it. But then that one sentence, gentle and not meant for him, made everything pause. 3 weeks now, still not a cent. This time the voice was clearer, hoarse, likely a cook spoken like a confession let slip in the middle of an overloaded shift. Michael glanced toward the kitchen door, partly open. Through the crack, he could see the outline of a large man moving between stove and oven. Another stood nearby, placing plates onto a tray, saying nothing. But his face betrayed the tension. One small detail caught Michael's attention. Neither of the two cooks looked at each other. No words exchanged. Their movements slower than usual, as if something heavy and invisible was dragging the air behind that door. Michael noticed the clock on the wall inside the kitchen covered in dust, like no one had checked the start or end of a shift in weeks. A young waitress, maybe 25, brought coffee to his table. She briefly glanced toward the kitchen, her eyes anxious. When Michael asked, softly, "Is something wrong?" she just gave a forced smile, set the pot down, and walked away quickly as if avoiding trouble. Who hasn't been paid? Why is no one speaking up? Is this a technical error, or is someone deliberately hiding the truth? Michael took a sip of coffee, but this time not to enjoy the smooth Arabica roast. It was to keep his composure while his heart began to stir. Because if what he heard was true, if staff in his new Dawn system hadn't been paid in 3 weeks, this wasn't a mistake. It was a betrayal of trust. He opened his small notebook and wrote a few concise lines. Beneath the bullet points, he circled 3 words, carefully: payroll, kitchen, silence. That was the moment he decided today he wasn't just here for breakfast. A nearby customer asked for extra bacon, but the waitress replied, "Not today. We're short-staffed in the kitchen." Michael looked again. Clearly, at least 3 cooks were working.
So what was the real reason one cook washed his hands at the sink without gloves? His face looked pale. Something was wrong.
Wrong enough to neglect basic food safety. Finally, Michael saw something only a founder would notice: a sign that once read "payroll schedule," every Friday pasted to the wood-paneled wall, now torn in half. As another staff member cleared a nearby table, they dropped a small envelope. On the outside, it read CASHADVANCEDONOTSUBMITTOACCOUNTING. Michael didn't touch it, but his eyes didn't leave it. And one question echoed in his mind: who is issuing cash advances without reporting them to HQ New Dawn Diner, Hudson Street location? A small corner spot that was always busy in the early morning. Nothing remarkable from the outside, just an old wooden sign, soft yellow lighting, and a hand-drawn menu hanging in the window. But stepping inside, you were pulled into a gentler past. Inside, light oak surfaces reflected the sun from the big front window. Brown leather booths, polished granite tabletops. A retro clock ticked rhythmically on the wall, while the steady hum of the coffee grinder echoed like the heartbeat of the morning. The scent of toasted bread drifted through the air, mingling with the warm aroma of hand-roasted Arabica being poured into mug. A cook placed a pan on the burner, and the pancake began to sizzle like a quiet promise of a comforting morning ahead. At a table near the open kitchen, a guest sat quietly. Michael Foster, 50 years old, founder of the New Dawn chain, showed up today not in a suit or with a board presentation, but in a light blue shirt and round glasses. He looked just like any middle-aged man seeking a little peace with his morning coffee. But behind those calm eyes was sharp observation. Every small movement in the diner, every passing glance, every soft-spoken word did not escape him. He chose to sit near the kitchen, the hottest, noisiest, and most revealing spot. Lana, morning shift waitress, about 25 years old, brown hair tied neatly behind her neck, slim build. She moved quickly, skillfully navigating trays, smiling at guests, but never overly friendly. The way she spoke to the kitchen staff, only nods or words like, "Yes, sir." That's enough, as if everything needed to stay minimal. As if she had learned something that saying less is safer. Lana bent down to count her tips in a small corner near the dish cupboard. Just as she finished, she heard footsteps behind her, jumped slightly, then quickly shoved the money into a wooden drawer. When she turned around, Rick was already standing there, face expressionless, saying nothing. Rick, the kitchen, lead about 40.
Solid build chef coat, faintly stained with grease.
He was the one who had muttered earlier, 3 weeks now, still not a cent.
Since then, Michael noticed Rick never made eye contact with anyone.
His hands stayed busy, but there was something in his posture, the kind of posture only someone who's endured too long can carry. A regular at the bar pulled out his wallet, handed a tip directly to Lana. "Here you go. I see you here every morning," but Lana glanced around nervously and whispered, "Sorry, could you please just leave it on the tray?" The guest looked surprised, but did as asked. Michael saw everything and took note. At the far end of the dining area near the entrance, another staff member was wiping down tables when a small notebook slipped from her hand. As she bent to pick it up, Michael caught a glance of the scribbled cover tip list DONOT send to system. In a system Michael had designed to automate and make every financial transaction transparent, the words "Do not send to system" lit up in his mind like a red alarm. Michael scanned the room. A young woman whispered to her friend, "The food here is great, but the staff looks so tense." A boy on a high chair accidentally spilled his orange juice. Lana rushed over to clean, expression steady, but her eyes were red. Rick tossed a rag onto the counter, then turned and walked into the back. No one called him. No one followed. Michael suddenly felt a lump in his throat. He had built New Dawn with one simple belief: a good breakfast should never be cooked in fear. But this morning he was witnessing a diner bearing his name with corners still left in the dark. Michael Foster was just reaching for the door when he froze. He didn't hear the full sentence, but the last 3 words, "then just quit," hit him like a cold hammer against the palm of his hand. He stopped, tilted his head slightly. Inside, Lana's voice, still soft, still polite, was whispering to a young busgirl. Rick said, "If we ask about pay again, then just quit." It wasn't loud, but it struck harder than any fire alarm Michael had ever heard. He didn't turn around right away. Instead, he stood pressed against the side wall, his hand over his shirt pocket as if counting heartbeats.
Suddenly, that half-eaten breakfast became meaningless.
Inside him, an unnamed struggle began to rise. He had heard many complaints before. He'd seen disgruntled staff. But this time, Lana's voice wasn't a complaint. It was despair, swallowed and spoken like an unwritten rule: anyone who asks about pay disappears from the schedule next week. She wasn't speaking to Michael, but she glanced around as if even the brick walls might be listening. Then came a line from Leo, the dishwasher, over 50 slightly hunched hands, always smelling faintly of soap. Rick said, "If you think working without pay is a problem, then you're not a fit for the culture here." Michael heard every word, as if each syllable had been hammered into the cold tile floor. No one in the diner knew he was the CEO. But now Michael's eyes no longer belonged to a guest. Michael returned to his table but didn't take another bite. He opened his small notebook and wrote a short line: "Rick, unpaid wages. Begin observation group." All around the diner was still bustling. A family of 4 ordered more pancakes. An elderly couple lifted their coffee cups. Everything seemed normal. But beneath that peaceful surface, something was rotting from the inside. A regular customer stepped in. Started chatting with Lana. "Rick still hasn't signed off on payroll." Lana gave a faint smile. Maybe he's busy. That answer, so light, was all Michael needed to realize it wasn't just Lana. Not just Leo. But this entire diner had been living with something they no longer dared to name: systemic injustice. On the brick wall near the kitchen, a slogan read, "At New Dawn, every drop of sweat deserves recognition." Michael looked at those words, then looked at Rick, who had just walked out of the kitchen office holding a stack of payroll envelopes. Rick smiled at the guests, held a tray, but no one saw him hand out any envelopes. Michael picked up his pen and added another line: audit payroll. Is someone unpaid guests kept chatting? But the camera zoomed in on the staff's faces, Lana wiping a table, stealing glances toward the kitchen office. Leo standing at the sink sleeves, soaked eyes cast downward like someone long used to being invisible. A young busboy, hands trembling slightly as Rick walked past him with a heavy presence. What is Rick hiding? Why is the payroll unclear? Who hasn't been paid? And how long has it been? Michael didn't rush. He didn't raise his voice. He simply set down his coffee cup, sat up straighter, and smiled calmly as Lana walked by. How long have you worked this shift? He asked, like any customer just trying to make small talk. Lana paused. A flicker of hesitation crossed her eyes. But then she nodded and smiled lightly. Almost 7 months now, but I might quit this week. Michael tilted his head, his eyes softening while Lana hesitated. Her hand gripped the serving tray tightly, then the words slipped out as if they had been held in too long. I've asked about my pay a few times. Rick won't give a straight answer. He just says, wait till next week. But it's been 3 weeks now, and I haven't received anything. No dramatic piano. No flashing lights. Just Michael, his hand already back on the notebook, writing the first line under a new heading: morning shift, Lana, 7 months, unpaid 3 weeks. A young dishwasher, Kevin, about 19 years old, with a small burn on his hand, walked up to the counter to get some water. Michael spoke gently. You, a student? Kevin nodded, drying his hands with a cloth. Yes, second year. I work weekends and mornings, but I think I'll drop out this semester. Why not? Enough money? I've been here for about 6 weeks, but my paycheck keeps getting delayed. They say it's a system error. But funny how the system only breaks when it's poor people involved. Michael didn't respond. He just looked at Kevin for a long moment, trying to keep his face calm. Rick emerged from the kitchen office holding a stack of payroll envelopes. He handed 2 out to nearby employees, patting them on the back as if he were bestowing a gift. Lana stood at the counter, both hands clenched. Where's mine? She asked, trying to keep her voice steady. Rick didn't look up. He just mumbled, probably a mix-up at the office. Check again next week. Lana bit her lip. She didn't ask again. Didn't frown. She just turned around slowly and walked into the back room, where there was an old wooden chair and a gray canvas backpack. Michael stood less than 4 meters away. His hand gently gripped the coffee cup, now turning cold. In his eyes, at that moment, Lana was no longer just a diner employee. She was the image of a whole generation of young workers being run by Ricks disguised as managers. Michael happened to see an envelope fall from the tray Rick was holding. As he bent to pick it up, a name on the envelope caught his eye. Week 2 payroll, Rick Martin, amount $1,280 paid. Michael froze. A man withholding pay from staff, still issuing his own paycheck by hand. Lana sat alone during break. She pulled out her phone and opened her banking app. Balance, $12.47. She didn't cry. But her fingers clenched when a push notification popped up from the childcare app: Friday childcare fee unpaid. Deadline today, 5:00 p.m. Michael stood behind the wooden divider light from the kitchen, casting a glow on one side of his face. He watched Lana for a long moment, then added 2 more lines to his notebook: manager holding wages. Staff afraid to speak up. Need to verify payroll access and permissions tied to Rick. Michael stood up. No rush. No drama. He gently placed his napkin on the table, adjusted the cuff of his shirt, then walked directly toward the kitchen counter where Rick was chatting with 2 younger kitchen staff. The air in the room stretched tight as Michael came to a stop right in front of Rick. He didn't raise his voice, but each word that followed, clear and sharp, cut through the fog like a silent blade. I have a few questions about payroll. And why someone who's worked 3 weeks still hasn't received a single dollar? Rick paused. A metal spoon dropped to the floor, the sharp clang echoing in the room. One of the cooks quickly bent to pick it up, hands slightly trembling. Rick curled his lips into a half smile, trying to stay calm, probably just some office mix-up. They're swamped this season. It'll get sorted soon. Michael didn't answer right away. but the soft smile on his face had disappeared completely. He slowly opened his notebook, turning directly to the page labeled Rick. You told Lana if she keeps asking about her pay, she can quit. To Kevin, the dishwasher, you said if he finds working for free a problem, he doesn't belong here. And the payroll, only you hold it. A flicker of confusion crossed Rick's eyes. I mean, I said it, but it was just joking around. Michael looked up, and his eyes, no longer those of a customer, but of the founder of New Dawn, stared straight into the face of everything he once believed was right. You thought no one was listening, but I was. Rick tried to chuckle, turning to the staff around him. You all know I've always got everyone's back. Lana stepped out from the back room. Her face was pale. Her eyes were red. Rick, I couldn't pay my child care this week. You told me till next week, but you've said that for 3 weeks now. Rick cut her off. I never made you stay. If you can't handle the pressure, then quit. That sentence felt like a slap in the middle of a crowded room. Michael furrowed his brow, then turned to the staff. Anyone here who's had their pay delayed in the past month, raise your hand. One by one, hands rose. From cooks, bussers, to dishwashers. In total, 9 people. I tried emailing HR, someone said, but Rick told me whatever you write ends up on my desk anyway. I was afraid of losing my shifts. Michael looked at Rick again. His voice was low, but it carried weight. You've created a culture of fear. Will Rick face consequences? Is there truly a flaw in the New Dawn system, or is someone abusing it? And what will Michael do next? Michael pulled out his phone. Not to call the office, but to open the company's internal app. He showed Rick a graph. This is the payroll record of this branch for the past 6 weeks. Morning shifts show no logged wages, no tip tracking. But you have been getting paid on time every week. Rick said nothing. Everyone else stood silent. And do you know, Michael continued, voice now firm, I've never authorized manual payroll access for anyone except the head of accounting. Rick couldn't respond. An older employee, Mr. David, 61 years old, dish station, spoke up. I've worked here 3 years. First time I've seen a CEO walk into the kitchen and ask if we've been paid. The entire diner went still. The midday light spilled across Michael's face, half in brightness, half in shadow. He stood silent for a beat. Then he slowly removed his round glasses, set them gently on the counter, his eyes fixed on Rick. I'm Michael Foster, founder of the New Dawn chain. No one said a word. Not a single sound. A young waitress froze behind the counter, water tray tilted. A pancake smoked on the griddle behind her, but the cook didn't turn back. Rick went numb. The words Michael Foster rang in his head like thunder. His jaw clenched. Eyes darted as if looking for an escape route, but there was nowhere left to run. Michael took a step forward. Rick, I installed an automated payroll system at every location 6 months ago. No one is allowed to hold payroll. No one has the authority to delay employee payment. Not even you. A busser quietly covered her mouth. Lana stepped back, still holding her apron. She whispered, Is he really the CEO? Michael gave a signal. From the door, a man in a black dress shirt entered wearing a badge that read Supervisor Regional Manager of the East District. In his hand was a tablet already open to the store's internal camera feed. No explanation needed. He placed the tablet on the counter, angled just enough so everyone could see. On the screen, Rick at 8:32 a.m. last Monday walked into the small office behind the kitchen. He opened his personal cabinet. One by one, payroll envelopes were taken out of the safe, not to be distributed, but to be collected. He placed them into a separate drawer and locked it, then walked back out as if nothing had ever happened. At 8:37, Lana walked into the room looking for her payroll slip. There was nothing. She stood there for a few seconds, then turned away. Quietly. Lana watched the footage, her hands dropped to her sides. A tear rolled down her cheek, not out of shame, but because finally she was believed. I thought maybe the office really forgot me, she whispered. Michael turned to Rick. Rick's face was red now, both hands bracing against the counter as if trying to steady himself. I don't need excuses, Michael said. Rick stammered, I was just holding them. Didn't want the kids to lose theirs 6 straight weeks and not a single person received a payment. Michael cut him off. No one in the diner doubted anymore. No one stood behind Rick now. What would happen to Rick? Would Lana and the others get what they deserved, and what decision would Michael, as CEO, make right now? Michael picked up the tablet, handed it to the supervisor. Send this recording to legal and HR. Then he turned to the room. Anyone who's owed wages or has experienced delays, meet me after your shift. I'll approve everything on the spot. One employee burst into tears. Another clenched their fist for the first time out of relief. Rick could no longer stand upright. He turned to Michael, forced a smile. I just did it because of revenue pressure. I didn't want anyone to leave. Michael didn't scold. He just looked straight at him. People don't leave because they're too poor. They leave because they've gone too long without being valued. There was no need to wait until shift's end. No meeting room. No paperwork from HQ. Right there in the middle of the diner, once stifled by silence, Michael stood tall, his gaze sweeping over every staff member, now quietly watching him. His voice was low, but rang out with clarity, cutting through the moment like thunder before a storm. Starting now, all payments will be processed through the system automatically. Transparently, a wave of stillness swept through the room. No one moved, but the air was shifting like a current rediscovering its path. Michael didn't stop. No one is allowed to hold wages. No one is allowed to delay payment. You work, you get paid. No vague promises. No, we'll look into it. Michael pulled out his phone, opened the internal operations app, scanned the QR code on the central POS system. The screen displayed a status manual. Hold Rick. M6 payroll cycles delayed. Michael tapped override, then selected release all due payments. A soft beep echoed. All delayed payroll entries instantly changed to sent. One employee burst into tears. She covered her mouth, stepped back as if unable to believe what had just happened. Michael turned to Lana. She was still standing by the counter, hands trembling slightly, eyes fixed on him. He walked over and pulled out an envelope, but this time not from the office. From his own hands, prepared personally. Lana, this is a full-time contract, including 3 months of childcare support, so you don't have to work while worrying if your child is being looked after. And he paused, placed one more document inside. A letter of apology. From me. Lana covered her mouth. Her eyes filled with tears, not out of sorrow, but because someone had finally stood up for her. She gave a small nod, clutched the envelope to her chest. Thank you, Mr. Michael. A young kitchen assistant who had been standing quietly in the corner stepped forward. We always thought no one would care, that we were just faceless names. Michael turned to him, gave a warm smile. New Dawn wasn't built by celebrities. It was built by people like you, working quietly day after day. And today, you're the reason I'm standing here. Michael left the diner before the lunch rush began. He didn't need a send-off. No camera flashes. No applause. He left only one thing behind, not a quote, but a system. Now active. And one that would never again let anyone work without pay. A plate of pancakes, no matter how hot, can't warm the air in a diner if the cook has gone 3 weeks without wages. A cup of coffee, no matter how perfectly brewed, can't bring out a genuine smile if the server pouring it still hasn't dared to ask, where's my paycheck? New Dawn Diner was never just a name. It was once Michael Foster's dream of a place where anyone could start over. But today he realized something: the sunrise can't come if someone in the kitchen still lives as if they are invisible. Michael is not just a CEO. He's someone who once failed, was once dismissed, once went hungry to build his future. And because of that, he understands this truth: fairness doesn't come from generosity. It comes from never letting silence last too long. To Michael, a business cannot call itself successful if it allows silence to become a management tool. It can't be called a healthy work environment if fear is masked by polite smiles and tidy uniforms. It can't be called company culture if good people must hesitate before asking about their own paycheck. A strong system isn't defined by revenue reports. It's defined by this, that the last person closing the kitchen at night still knows they deserve to be paid.